Snow was still falling when Jon arrived at the camp near the twins. Robb Stark's army had halted for the night, tents scattered around the muddy ground, fires burning low. Jon pulled his cloak tighter around him, Ghost padding silently at his side. No! He had deserted the night's watch, broken his oath, but when he heard rumors of betrayal in the north, he couldn't stay silent, not when Robb, his brother in all but blood, was walking into danger. Robb stepped out of his tent, surprised to see Jon. They stared at each other for a long moment, then embraced like brothers long separated by war and fate. "What are you doing here, Jon?" Robb asked, pulling back, eyes scanning the shadows behind him. "I bring news," Jon said quietly. "Dark news. I couldn't send a raven. I didn't trust them." Robb led him inside the tent. The war map lay across a wooden table, stained with candle wax and blood. Grey wind lay nearby, lifting his head slightly at Ghost's presence. The two direwolves exchanged a low growl, then settled. "Speak," Robb said, serious now. Jon didn't waste time. "Roose Bolton, he's not loyal. He's already meeting with Lannister envoys. Your men, some of them, aren't yours anymore." Robb's jaw clenched. "You're sure?" "I overheard men at Castle Black. A ranger from the Dreadfort had visited. They said Roose is biding his time, waiting. He'll betray you at the worst moment." Robb turned away, fists clenched. "I trusted him. I gave him command." Jon stepped closer. "You need to move. You need to test your men, quietly. See who truly follows the wolf." Robb was silent for a moment, then turned back to Jon. "You risked everything coming here. I'll not waste it." They began that night. Jon stayed hidden during the day, speaking only to Robb and a few he trusted. Grey wind always nearby to sniff out lies. Robb started feeding false orders to different commanders. One group was told they'd be attacking Lannisters to the west. Another told they'd hold at the twins. And Roose Bolton, he was given a task that sounded promising, but was actually a dead end. Within days, the whispers returned. Jon, wearing a cloak like any northern soldier, heard men talking in hushed voices by the fires. "Bolton's not happy," said. "Robb's lost his mind. He says we should head back north, take control." Jon reported everything. That night, in Robb's tent, Jon said, "He's moving. He's going to strike from the inside." Robb nodded. "Then we strike first." The next morning, Robb called a war council. Roose stood at his right, cold as ever, face unreadable. "We march at dawn," Robb announced. "But first, I need every commander to swear again to House Stark. Here, now." It was bold, dangerous, but it worked. Men stepped forward, placing their swords on the table, swearing loyalty. Roose hesitated. Jon stepped out from behind the tent flap then, face grim, eyes locked with Bolton's. The council went still. Jon's black cloak swayed, but his eyes burned with fire. "You didn't expect to see me, did you?" he said quietly. Roose said nothing. "Tell them," Robb said. "Tell them what you planned." Roose laughed, not the sound of amusement, but of a man caught too late. "You know nothing, boy," he sneered at Jon. "You left your vows behind. You think your word means anything here." Jon stepped forward, Ghost at his side now, lips curled in a low growl. "I heard enough," Jon said. "Enough to know you were preparing to hand Robb over. To the Lannisters. To Tywin." Gasps filled the tent. Men stepped back from Roose, suddenly seeing him for what he was. Robb drew his sword, slowly. "You would sell your own people." Roose remained cold. "The North will burn either way. Better to be on the winning side." "Not if that side wears a lion," Robb said. Steel flashed. The tent burst into chaos. But one thing was clear. The North had been warned, and Robb Stark was no longer blind. With Jon by his side, the game had changed. The wolves were watching now. The firelight outside the command tent danced on the blades of drawn swords. Men stared, some uncertain, some ready, but no one moved, not yet. The silence stretched as Roose Bolton stood his ground, surrounded but unafraid, his face as calm as a frozen lake. Jon didn't flinch. Ghost was low to the ground, a silent threat with white fur and red eyes, growling deep enough to shake the air. Robb Stark, still holding his sword, took a step forward. His voice was steady but sharp. "Roose Bolton, you are charged with treason against House Stark and plotting with House Lannister against the North." Roose's lips curled into a small smile. "And what court will you try me in? What justice do you think still exists in this bloody realm, boy?" Robb didn't answer with words. He lowered his sword tip, not in surrender, but in a subtle signal. 3 Stark guards grabbed Bolton from behind, twisting his arms and forcing him to his knees. "I'll have your head for this," Bolton muttered. "Your men won't all follow you. Not now." Robb glanced at the other Northern lords still standing in the tent. Some looked shaken, others furious. A few had guilt in their eyes. Jon stepped forward. "Then let them show themselves now. Anyone else ready to betray the wolf? Speak." Nobody spoke. Robb's eyes locked on Lord Medger Serwyn. "You were with Roose when he sent that last raven, weren't you?" The older man hesitated, sweating. I thought it was a scouting report, I swear." "Swear it to the gods," Jon said sharply, his voice echoing louder than expected. Serwyn dropped to one knee. "I only followed orders, my king. I never meant harm." Robb's jaw clenched, but he waved a hand. "Guards, remove Bolton. Put him in chains. We'll deal with him at first light." As they dragged Roose Bolton out, still silent, still smiling faintly like he knew some final secret, Jon looked to Robb. "He's not alone. There's more. Back in the north, at the Dreadfort, possibly even in Winterfell." Robb nodded. "I know. This war isn't just at the Twins anymore." Jon looked tired. "We need to go home, Robb, before the North is lost from the inside." Later that night, the camp was tense. Everyone had heard what happened. Men whispered near fires, wondering how deep the betrayal went. Some wondered if they would be next. Robb sat alone in his tent, looking at the map of the North, fingers tracing a line toward Winterfell. Jon entered quietly. "You did the right thing," Jon said. Robb didn't answer at first. "I don't feel like I did." "You stopped a traitor before he struck." "I trusted him." Robb's voice was low. "He fought beside me at the Whispering Wood. He rode with me after my father died." And all the while, he was waiting for his moment. Jon sat across from him. "That's what betrayal is. It hides behind loyalty, until it doesn't." Robb looked up at him then. "I don't know who else I can trust." Jon gave him a half smile. "Start with the ones who never wanted a crown." Robb laughed bitterly. "That would be you, Snow. I'm not a lord. I'm not even your brother by name." "No," Robb said. "You're better. You chose us even when we didn't ask." They sat in silence for a while. Then Robb stood. "We ride for the North." The phrase "will have to wait." Jon stood too. "What about Walder Frey?" Robb's face hardened. "He'll expect an apology and a marriage. I'll give him both until we no longer need him." Jon raised an eyebrow. "That sounds dangerously like something Roose would say." Robb didn't deny it. "War changes us, Jon. I only pray it doesn't rot us." The next morning, the banners were raised, and the Stark army turned north instead of west. The message was clear. House Stark was coming home, but deep in the cold heart of the Dreadfort, another raven had already flown, and a darker force stirred. Jon and Robb had exposed a snake, but snakes never crawl alone, and the North was about to show its teeth. The cold northern wind was sharper as Robb's host rode northward. The banners of House Stark fluttered defiantly above the column of soldiers, but trust no longer flowed freely between them. Men eyed each other with suspicion now, and old friendships carried a new weight, like blades tucked beneath cloaks. Jon rode beside Robb near the front. Ghost loped through the snow-dusted woods just beyond the trail, never straying too far. Behind them, Grey Wind moved like a shadow, as if sensing that danger was no longer on the battlefield alone. "They'll be waiting," Jon said quietly. Bolton had time to send messages. He wouldn't stay silent if he knew he was finished. Robb nodded grimly. "I'm counting on it. Let them prepare. Let them rally. We'll face them in the open rather than be stabbed in our sleep." They passed through several villages as they traveled, all of them subdued. Houses were boarded up, windows shuttered. No children ran through the streets. The people were watching, but no one cheered for the king in the north. That silence said more than words ever could. At one village near Barrington, an old man approached their line. His eyes were watery, his back bent, but his voice carried. "They came through last week," he told Robb. "Bolton's riders took our grain, our men, said the king was dead and the north would kneel to the lion." Robb's jaw tightened. Did anyone resist? "A few," the old man whispered. "They're buried now." Jon felt it in his chest like a slow-burning fire. "They're trying to break the north before we even return." Robb turned to one of his commanders. "Leave a squad. Feed these people. Protect them. Let them see that House Stark has not forgotten them." As they moved on, the cold thickened, not just in the air, but in the way men spoke, in the way eyes lingered too long on each other's backs. Jon knew the true threat wasn't just Bolton or even the Lannisters. It was fear, and how it crept into good men's hearts and made traitors of them. That night, the camp settled in near a frozen stream. Robb's tent was well guarded, but Jon could still feel unease. He barely slept. Ghost paced the outer ring of the camp, sniffing and growling at passing shadows. Then, a scream. Steel clashed. Horses neighed wildly. Jon was up in a breath, sword drawn, as shadows flickered across the snowy camp. Ambush. Jon ran through the chaos, his blade cutting down a man he didn't even recognize. A northern soldier with no banner. That was the worst part. They looked like any other man in the army, but they struck with fury, with precision. Saboteurs, not soldiers. Robb emerged from his tent half-dressed, but already gripping his sword. Grey Wind lunged into the fray with terrifying speed, tearing through the attackers. Jon reached him just in time to block a blade from striking Robb's exposed side. The two fought back to back, swinging, ducking, trusting their wolves and each other in the blood-lit darkness. When the fighting died down, the snow was red. 7 men dead, all Starks. 12 more wounded, and the enemy? They wore no sigil, they left no trace. Robb stood over the body of one of his fallen men, eyes hollow. "They were ours," he said. "They ate with us, drank with us. They with bought," Jon replied, "or blackmailed, or broken." Robb looked to him. "If this is what our return brings, what will we find in Winterfell?" Jon didn't answer, because you already knew. Far to the east, behind the cold grey walls of the Dreadfort, Ramsay Snow sat in his father's chair. He smiled as the Raven arrived. His father had failed, but Ramsay had been preparing for this moment his entire life. The bastard of Bolton would not let the wolves take back the north. He would burn it first. The snow had turned grey with ash by the time Robb's army reached the outskirts of the Dreadfort. They didn't march in with banners high. They camped in the woods instead, hidden among the twisted trees and frost-bitten brush. Jon had insisted on it. "Bolton's not a fool," Jon said, crouched over a map, lit by the dim flicker of a lantern. "He knows we're coming, but he won't expect us to be cautious. He thinks you'll come roaring for revenge." Robb nodded. Let him think it. Outside the tent, the camp was eerily quiet. The wind howled through the branches, and even the wolves were still. Ghost sat near the perimeter, alert. Grey Wind paced restlessly, sniffing the wind. That night, Jon and Robb gathered a small group, men they trusted without question. Lord Greatjon Umber, Mage Mormont, a few others who had proven themselves loyal in blood and battle. "We strike tonight," Robb said, voice low. "Not the castle, not yet. We need answers first." John unfurled a torn piece of parchment, a crude drawing of secret tunnels beneath the Dreadfort. "There's an old servant path through the woods," he said. "Used to smuggle food during the long winters, forgotten by most, but not all." "How do you know about it?" Great John asked, eyeing John with suspicion. John hesitated. "A ranger from the Dreadfort once talked too much at Castle Black." That was a lie, but necessary. The truth was darker. John had interrogated a dying traitor during the ambush. His body still lay buried in the last camp, face frozen in fear. The group moved at moonrise. Cloaks drawn, swords sheathed, they crept like shadows through the snow. The trees closed around them, gnarled and hunched, as if the north itself was watching their steps. When they found the tunnel entrance, it was nearly buried. Robb knelt, brushing away frost with his bare hands. "We go in quiet," John said. "If we're lucky, we find out who's still loyal inside. If not, we cut our way out," Robb finished. The tunnel was narrow, damp, and smelled of mold and blood. It twisted for what felt like hours before opening into a cellar beneath the Dreadfort. Faint torchlight flickered above. They waited, listened. Their footsteps. 2 guards passed by the cellar door, speaking in low tones. "Ramses got new playthings," one muttered, "screaming louder than the last lot. Says it calms him." The other chuckled. "He's worse than his father ever was." John's stomach turned. Robb's jaw clenched. They let the guards pass, then moved silently through the hall. The Dreadfort was colder than Winterfell, darker too, the walls wet with dampness, and every sound echoed like it didn't belong. John's sword felt heavier in his hand. Ghost padded beside him, ears flat, hackles raised. In a chamber near the eastern wing, they found it, a prison room, its door half open. Inside, 2 stark soldiers sat chained to the wall, blooded, half-conscious. Robb rushed forward. "Who did this?" One of the men looked up weakly. "Bolton's son," he whispered. He made us say we'd betrayed you. Said he'd send our tongues to Winterfell next." John knelt. "You're safe now." A cruel laugh echoed from the doorway. They turned. Ramsay Snow stood there, smirking. His hair was wet, as if he'd just washed the blood off his hands. A dozen armed men stood behind him. "Well, well," Ramsay said. "A reunion in my own home. How touching." Robb stood, drawing his sword. "This ends now, bastard." Ramsay's grin widened. "You really think the North is yours again?" He stepped forward, fearless. "The North doesn't care about wolves or lions anymore," he said. "They care about surviving. And I make sure they do. I feed them. I kill for them. You're just another boy playing king." John moved between them. "You tortured your own men." "They talked," Ramsay replied. "Isn't that what you came for?" His voice dropped. "You think exposing my father was enough? He was weak, that's why he failed. But me, I'm worse." Then he whistled. The walls screamed. Doors slammed open. Iron clashed. Guards poured into the hall behind them. Robb and John stood back to back again, just like before. Only this time, they were deep in the wolf's den. Steel clashed in the narrow halls of the Dreadfort as chaos exploded like fire in dry grass. Ramsay's guards surged forward, blades drawn, their boots pounding against the cold stone floor. Robb Stark raised his sword and met the charge head-on, his war cry echoing through the stone corridors. John moved beside him without hesitation, Ghost darting ahead like a phantom, leaping straight into the throat of the nearest attacker. Grey wind barreled into the next, tearing through leather and bone as easily as if it were paper. The dire walls moved like death itself, fast, brutal, merciless. The hallway became a storm of blades. John ducked under a sword, rammed his own into the attacker's gut, then twisted. Blood sprayed the wall warm and thick, but there was no time to think. Another guard came. John parried, kicked him down, and ended it quickly. His breaths came short, his muscles ached, but he kept moving. Robb fought like a man possessed. His sword danced with fury, fueled by betrayal, by rage, by the need to protect the North. "Hold the line!" he roared as more of their loyal men flooded in from the tunnel behind them, drawn by the noise. Ramsay, still untouched, stood at the far end of the corridor. He didn't fight. He simply watched, the twisted smirk never leaving his face. Blood splattered across his fine leathers as he leaned against the wall, admiring the carnage like it was art. "You can kill them all, Stark," he said over the noise. "But for every man you cut down, 3 more are waiting in the dark. You'll never make it out alive." Robb didn't answer with words. He flung his sword at Ramsay. Ramsay dodged just in time. The blade grazed his shoulder and clanged against the stone wall. His grin faltered for just a breath, and that was enough. Jon lunged forward, grabbing one of the torches from the wall and throwing it hard at the oil lamp near Ramsay's feet. The flame burst. Fire leapt up with a roar. The hallway filled with smoke and confusion. Screams rose as flames licked the tapestries and wooden beams, turning the dark stone prison into a furnace. "Fall back!" Jon shouted, choking on smoke. "Now!" Robb grabbed the 2 wounded prisoners, hauling one over his shoulder while Mage Mormont helped with the other. They pushed their way back toward the tunnel. Grey Wind and Ghost cleared the path, their snarls echoing louder than the screams behind them. Behind them, Ramsay vanished into the flames. Back through the tunnel they went, coughing, limping, bleeding, but alive. When they emerged into the forest, the cold air bit into their lungs like knives. Jon collapsed to his knees, gasping. Robb stood, face blackened with soot, his eyes wild. They made it back to the hidden camp, just before sunrise. The soldiers there stared as their king returned, covered in blood, dragging 2 near-dead comrades with him. "Get them treated," Robb ordered. "Now." Jon sat by the fire, silent. His hands shook, not from fear, but from what he saw in Ramsay's eyes. There was no hesitation, no fear of death, just hunger. Robb sat across from him. "We saw his real face tonight." Jon nodded. "He doesn't want to rule the North. He wants to break it." Robb looked down at his burned cloak. "He'll torch every village, every holdfast, just to spite us. That's not a war, it's madness." Jon's voice was hoarse. "Then we don't fight like lords, we fight like wolves, in the shadows, with teeth bared." That night, Robb Stark gave his next order. "No more banners, no open marches. We go silent. We turn every village he controls into a trap. Every forest his men walk into becomes their grave." And just like that, the king in the north declared a different kind of war, not of thrones, but of vengeance. In the darkness of the trees, with winter creeping in and wolves on the prowl, the true fight for the north had begun. The war changed after that night. No horns, no banners, no proud speeches before battle. Robb Stark became a ghost in his own land. The Stark army broke into small packs, moving through forests, hills, and frozen rivers. They struck Bolton supply lines, vanished before reinforcements arrived, and left nothing behind but broken men and fear. Villages that had bowed to the Dreadfort woke up free. Bolton banners burned in their squares. Jon led many of those strikes. He learned quickly that this kind of war was different. There were no clean victories, no cheers, just cold choices, hard ones. Sometimes a traitor begged, sometimes he lied. Jon hated those moments most because he could see himself in them. Men who swore loyalty out of fear, not hate. One night, after a successful raid, Jon sat alone sharpening his sword. Ghost lay beside him, resting his head on Jon's knee. "You feel it too, don't you?" Jon whispered. "This land's hurting." Ghost didn't answer, but his red eyes never stopped watching the dark. Robb joined Jon by the fire later. His face looked older now, carved by sleepless nights and responsibility. "Scouts say Ramsay's moving east," Robb said. "Burning villages that helped us. making examples. Jon's jaw tightened. He wants us to come to him, and we will, Robb replied, but not how he expects. They planned carefully. Ramsay was cruel, but he wasn't stupid. He used fear like a weapon, spreading it ahead of him so people would break before he even arrived. So Jon decided to break that fear. In a small village near the Weeping Water, Ramsay's men arrived at dawn, only to find the streets empty. Doors open, fires still warm. It looked like the people had fled in panic. They hadn't. As the Bolton men moved deeper into the village, arrows fell from rooftops. Traps snapped shut. Wolves howled from the tree line. Jon appeared like a shadow, cutting down the first rider before he could even shout. Robb's men closed in, fast, silent and deadly. The fight was short, brutal, complete. When it was over, Jon ordered the Bolton survivors to be tied and brought before the villagers, who now stood watching, eyes wide but no longer afraid. Jon stepped forward. "This is what happens now," he said loudly. "Bolton men bring death, and death finds them first. The North remembers who protects it." The villagers cheered, not loudly, but with something stronger than noise. Hope. Word spread faster than fire. Ramsay heard it all. He stood in the ruined hall of a burned keep, listening to the report from a shaking messenger. When the man finished, Ramsay smiled slowly. "So my brother thinks he's teaching lessons now," Ramsay said softly. He walked closer, knife in hand. "That's sweet." The knife flashed. The messenger fell. Ramsay turned to his remaining men. "Bring me prisoners. I want screams. I want stories that make mothers hide their children when they hear a wolf howl." But even as he spoke, doubt crept into his eyes, because fear was no longer enough. A few days later, Jon received news that hit harder than any blade. Winter fell. A raven arrived at dawn. Jon read the message twice, then handed it to Robb without a word. Robb's face went pale. "Ramsay's been there," Robb said quietly. "He didn't take it. He defiled it, left bodies, wrote his name in blood on the walls." Jon closed his eyes. "Home." Robb crushed the parchment in his fist. "This ends now." Jon looked at him. "He wants you angry. He wants you reckless." Robb met Jon's gaze. "No, he wants me to chase him." Jon nodded slowly. "Then let's hunt him instead." They made a decision that would change everything. Robb would be seen, riding openly, drawing Ramsay's attention. Jon would disappear. The wolf would show himself. The ghost would strike. And Ramsay Snow would finally learn what it meant to be prey. Snow fell in thick silence as the trap was laid. Robb Stark rode with a detachment of his finest horsemen, banners fluttering just enough to draw Ramsay's eye. They didn't hide. They wanted to be seen. A proud, moving flame in the white wasteland of the North. The message was clear. The king in the North rides to reclaim his home. But what the message didn't say, what Ramsay didn't know, was that Jon Snow had already gone ahead. He moved like a shadow through the woods and ice-covered trails, cloaked in silence, guided by ghost and the scent of blood Ramsay always left behind. Jon knew this land better than he thought he did. The forgotten paths, the old farmhouses, the caves in the cliffs where wildlings once camped. Every step forward felt like walking into the heart of a storm. But Jon wasn't afraid anymore. Ramsay was exactly where they needed him to be, outside the ruins of Torrhen Square, waiting. He believed he was hunting Robb. In truth, he was walking into the teeth of the North. Ramsay stood on a rise, overlooking the snowy plains. His men were scattered, not in tight formations, too confident, too eager. He had no reason to expect resistance. After all, he'd killed the fear, or so he thought. "Stark comes openly," Ramsay muttered to himself, watching Robb's riders through a spyglass. "Such pride! He's more like father than he thinks." Behind him, his cruel band of killers waited, men who fought for gold, not loyalty, dogs that only barked for blood. But none of them noticed the silence creeping in. One by one, the outer scouts disappeared. Some never returned from the tree line. Some were found with their throats torn out, faces frozen in screams. By the time Ramsay's captain came running, eyes wide, blood on his cloak, it was too late. "We're surrounded," he gasped. "They're not attacking, they're watching." Ramsay's smirk faltered. "How many?" "I don't know. I didn't see them, but I heard them." Ramsay drew his blade, his voice dropping to a low growl. "Then we'll flush them out." He sent half his force toward the trees. None came back. Jon waited in the branches of an old pine, breath slow, blade ready. Ghost crouched beneath him, eyes glowing like twin embers in the frost. Around him, Stark loyalists, archers and hunters who had served House Stark since before Robb or Jon were born, took their positions. Jon didn't give the order to fire. He waited, and then Robb's signal lit the sky. A single burning arrow arced into the clouds and burst in a flash of fire. Jon stood. Now, arrows flew like rain. Ramsay's men screamed as the forest exploded with death. Ghost leapt from the shadows, ripping through the flanks. Stark's soldiers surged forward with steel and fury in their eyes, howling like wolves in the snow. Ramsay spun, fury flashing in his eyes. "Cowards, fight them!" But it was already unraveling. His killers weren't soldiers, they broke fast. Some threw down their swords, some fled into the woods. And Jon Snow came for him directly. The two met in the center of the chaos. Ramsay, blood-stained and snarling, raised his blade. "You've come a long way to die, Snow." Jon didn't speak. He attacked. Their blades clashed, furious, fast, relentless. Ramsay was quick, cruel, but Jon was colder, sharper. Every strike came with purpose, every movement carved with memory. The duel raged through the snow, the sounds of war fading behind them. At last, Jon struck Ramsay's sword away. He didn't kill him, not yet. He grabbed Ramsay by the throat and threw him to the ground, his knee pinning his chest. "You burned my home," Jon growled. "You defiled our people. You butchered the North." Ramsay smiled, blood leaking from his mouth. "And I'd do it again." Jon raised his blade, but Robb's voice stopped him. "Wait." Robb stood nearby, sword lowered, face like stone. "He doesn't get a clean death," Robb said. "Not after what he's done." Jon looked down at Ramsay, breathing heavy. "No," Jon agreed. He whistled. Ghost padded forward, slow, silent red eyes locked on the fallen bastard. Ramsay laughed weakly. "You'll regret this." But no one listened. Ghost lunged, and Ramsay Snow's screams were the last sound he ever gave the North. That night, the wolves howled louder than they had in years. Winter was far from over, but the North belonged to House Stark once again. The snow fell soft and slow as the battered army of House Stark approached Winterfell. For the first time in years, the great grey walls didn't feel like stone. They felt like home, but it was a home that had bled. The gates stood open, half-burned and splintered. Ramsay's men had fled or died, but their touch still lingered like rot in the bones of the place. Scorch marks clawed up the towers. Stark banners, once replaced by flayed men, now fluttered again in the wind, though the wolf's face was weathered and torn. Jon rode beside Robb in silence. They both stared up at the old towers, remembering different versions of the same childhood. Laughter, snowball fights, their father's voice echoing across the yard. Now it was quiet, too quiet. "I never thought I'd see this place again," Jon said quietly. Robb nodded. "Not like this." When they passed through the gate, the people came out slowly, gaunt faces, hollow eyes, survivors of starvation and fear. Women with children clutched close, old men wrapped in furs, boys barely old enough to stand holding wooden spears. But when they saw Robb, when they saw Jon, they knelt. Some wept, some whispered, "The Starks have come home." Robb dismounted and walked among them, placing a hand on shoulders, lifting children into his arms. He didn't smile. He didn't pretend this was a happy return. His face held the weight of every man he'd lost and every innocent Ramsay had destroyed. Jon followed behind, silent, always watching. They spent the next week restoring order. The last of the Bolton loyalists were hunted down or given a trial. Robb offered them mercy where he could, but few were worthy of it. Jon took no pleasure in executions, but he carried them out when needed. "The man who passes the sentence should swing the sword," Ned Stark had once said. Jon remembered, and he obeyed. But something had changed in both of them. They had seen the North's soul torn apart. They had fought not for glory or for power, but to keep something from dying completely, something older than the wall, older than kings. Dignity, honor, memory. The North. On the 8th night, as snow blanketed the godswood, Robb and Jon stood before the heart tree. Its red leaves trembled in the wind, and its carved face wept sap like blood. Robb knelt, laying his sword before the roots. "I lost more than I gained," he whispered. "Men, friends, my soul, maybe." Jon remained standing, eyes on the red face. "But you kept your name." Robb looked up at him. "Did I?" Jon turned, his voice low. "You could have let me die as a deserter. You didn't. You fought beside me, and you never asked for a crown." Robb sighed. "It doesn't feel like a victory." "It's not," Jon said. "But it's a beginning." The next morning, as the sun broke weakly through the clouds, Robb addressed the people of Winterfell from the balcony above the great hall. "I am not your king," he began, stunning everyone below. "Not yet. I failed you once, by trusting men who wore wolves on their cloaks but had lions in their hearts." Murmurs rose in the crowd. "But I have fought. I have bled. I have lost more than I can name, and I am here, not to rule you with fear, not to burn your homes, but to rebuild them." He looked out across the snow-covered courtyard. "If the North will have me still, I will serve." And they roared, not like soldiers, but like wolves. Later, Jon stood in the crypts of Winterfell alone, beneath the stone eyes of his ancestors. He stopped before the statue of Eddard Stark, his father, in all the ways that mattered. He lit a candle. "I kept your word," Jon whispered. "I watched over him. I watched over the North." Ghost sat beside him, silent. Then, behind him, Robb spoke softly. "You know, this war was won the moment you came back." Jon turned. "No. It was won when we remembered who we were." They didn't embrace. They didn't cry. They were men now. But as they walked up those cold stone steps together, side by side, Winterfell was no longer broken. The North remembered, and the wolves had returned.